So let's think about a contractual liability. And in this particular case, we're thinking about issuing some debt. Now, when we issue debt, we're selling the debt. We're basically asking investors to lend us money. And in exchange, we're going to promise to maybe pay them interest, do whatever we need to do in order for them to want to give us the money. So let's think about a contractual liability, and this is a piece, we'll call it a bond, a long-term piece of debt, whatever you want to call it. So we're issuing a contractual liability. For the person buying this is a debt security. For us, it is a debt liability. Okay, so we have got to start thinking about what are the variables that we need to put into the contract. Okay, so one of the variables obviously has to be the face amount of the debt. Also, they probably want some kind of an interest rate. We probably need a stated interest rate. They probably want this interest paid at certain intervals, so we want to identify the payment dates. And whether or not it is interest only. Or is it principal and interest? So we need to know those things. We need to know when the maturity date is. And if there are any other things that might make this interesting. Like, is this debt convertible to equity? Can the person who's holding the debt, can they force you to pay them back early? Can the company call the debt? Can they bring the debt back in, right? So other variables that might affect how much money somebody's willing to give us. Right? If the interest rate is variable versus fixed, right? All of these things are variables that we would want to take a look at within the guise of a contract liability. Now, the key to this, and we'll keep it simple, right? We'll keep our interest rates fixed, payment dates every 6 months. We'll do interest only, so we'll have a face amount. We'll have this will make this fixed. Payment dates will be semi-annual. We'll do interest only and maybe 10-year maturity, something like that. So we'll keep it simple for whatever example we put in place, right? So one of the things we've got to also evaluate is for the company. If the investor is looking at this company, what are the risk factors for this company? Because I've got to evaluate, as the investor, I got to evaluate risk about the company. Well, are they going to be able to pay me this face amount at maturity date? Are they going to be able to pay me this stated interest rate? What's the default risk? Is there an industry level risk? What are the different risk factors? I got to figure out what should I get paid? What should be the return I get? What should be the return given the risk factors? And all investors are asking that question. What kind of return do I need given the amount of risk that I'm taking? Every investor should always ask that question. And so when we start thinking about how do you calculate these risk factors, we have to start evaluating, well, what is the risk weight? What is the risk weight? And that should theoretically be what market participants believe is the risk rate. So let's figure out what we need to do to contemplate developing the risk rate. So this is the risk rate of return. And yeah, you can go to the market, we can look at the company, find out what their credit rating is, and figure out, given the credit rating, what should be a reasonable return given their credit rating, et cetera, et cetera. That's the easy way. Let's do it the hard way, so that way you understand maybe how that rate came to be. So when we ever think about the risk rate of return, we always start with the risk-free rate. Right? And we're going to look at the duration of the instrument, how long it's going to be out there. We're going to look at frequency of payments. Right? And that's going to help us figure out, well, what does this debt without any risk, what does it most likely resemble? And when we go and look for the risk-free rate, we're usually using the treasury rate. The US treasury rate. So if this contract that we're looking at was a 10-year note, 10-year debt, 10-year bond, then we would use, for an example, the 10-year treasury bond, treasury note, right, as the risk-free rate. And we'd start there, right? So we can then start adding to this what we think are the risk parameters. So if we looked at the 10-year rate, we may find that is, kind of looking at it this morning, the 10-year rate. So we'll start with the risk-free rate is around 1.4%. That's the current risk-free rate. That's the current 10-year rate, approximately. And that goes up and down. Right, and so as it goes higher, that people are expecting more of a return for putting their money aside for 10 years. But they believe that they're going to get their interest payments, and they believe they're going to get their principal back. They believe they're going to get the face amount back. But then we want to start adding in risk factors. Such as credit risk, inflation risk, liquidity risk, industry risk, geopolitical risk, etc. Because you as the investor know what you believe to be risky. And in here, you're going to start adding risk. you're going to start thinking about, okay, well, I want, for credit risk, I want, 400 basis points over the risk-free rate. So 400 basis points is equivalent, or is the same, to 4.00%. Every basis point is 0.001. Maybe my inflation risk is 50 basis points, 0.5%. Maybe the liquidity risk here is 75 basis points, 0.75. Maybe the industry risk is 25 basis points, 0.25. Maybe it's in a crazy country. Maybe it's a 100 basis point risk here. So I add a 1%. Now I'm going to add up all of these rates, and I'm going to come up with what I think is going to be a reasonable return for the risk that I'm taking. So I'm doing the math here quick. We got 250 plus 4, 650, plus 140, so 7.9%. So I want a 7.9% return for this particular company, given that they're going to issue their debt. All right? So the next thing is, well, if I issue this at 7.9, or I'm issuing this and the investors want 7.9, what should I make my stated interest rate? Well, that also all depends on how much money you want to pay back and how much money you want to get right now.